The Baltimore Ravens won day one of NFL free agency, and they really didn't even have to lift a finger to do so. We talk about that, Baltimore losing multiple players, and so much more coming up next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen every day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. So in video form on YouTube, you can like and subscribe to the channel. In audio form, you can follow along and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage, whether you're an everyday or a first-time listener or somewhere in the middle. Thank you for tuning in, watching, listening to the show. Day one of free agency officially in the books. Here to talk about that and a lot more with me is former Baltimore Ravens wide receiver and Super Bowl champion Qadry Ismail. And Q, this story for the Ravens seems to be one every season that we know it's coming, but everybody still gets upset when the Ravens don't make moves. And that is the Ravens like to feel it out, wait out the market a little bit. But I guess it doesn't make it any easier, and I get it. It doesn't make it any easier when you see teams spending left and right, making trades left and right. Ravens are losing some guys we'll talk about. But again, this is, for the most part, the Raven way. And again, it's not like they have $125 million plus in cap space to spend on guys right now.
I think the main thing is they have a formula. They like their formula. They like their way of evaluating players and making sure that this team has a certain continuity to it. And if you look at it historically, the Ravens have clearly shown that by sticking to their formula of developing within, going through the draft, making sure those different draft picks can rise up and take the place of a guy that might be leaving out the door, then they're going to keep doing that. And I think this free agency period, it had the big splash for what the Ravens needed, which was Ronnie Stanley. And so for them, yes, a Pat Mekari, a Brandon Stevens, we'll get into all those guys for sure. But I think they feel like, yeah, we got people in waiting. We got cap space that we got to be, dealing with. And we got some other things like Josh Allen getting a monster extension. And, oh, by the way, my quarterback is better than your quarterback. So there's so much that they have to juggle with right now. And I think free agency, as far as making these big splashes, that's a myopic view when you look at the bigger picture of what the Ravens are trying to deal with and putting together a team for 2025.
We saw a lot of good deals for teams yesterday. We also saw a lot of bad deals for teams yesterday because all of these teams that have cap space are going up against one another. Agents know that. They're trying to pit everybody against each other to get the most they can for their client. And it makes a lot of sense. And again, for the Ravens who don't have that much cap space to operate with in the first place, making a move for Ronnie Stanley, I know that this might not be the overly popular opinion, but I actually think the Ravens won day one of free agency here because they re-signed Ronnie to that $20 million per year deal. 3 years, $60 million, $44 million guaranteed. Why I think the Ravens won free agency on day one is because, did you see some of these offensive line contracts that were being handed out yesterday? I mean, just for starters at the tackle spot, you have Dan Moore, former Steelers offensive lineman, 4 years, $82 million. He had a good year last year, but he's kind of mediocre in pass protection and run blocking. Jalen Moore doesn't have a ton of playing experience. He got 2 years, $30 million from the Chiefs. Morgan Moses, old friend alert, got 3 years, $24 million from the New England Patriots. And then you can even go over to the guard position, which also had some guys who ended up signing. Aaron Banks, 4 years, $77 million. You have Patrick Mekari, who we'll talk about. He got over $10 million per season. Evan Brown, 2 years, $11. You look at all of these deals across the league, Hugh, and Ronnie Stanley, in my opinion, was by far the best offensive lineman on the free agent market. And if he had actually hit free agency Q, I think he probably would have gotten $30+ million per year. the Ravens got him at a hometown discount. They made sure that they didn't have to necessarily break the bank, at least not compared to what these other teams are giving offensive linemen that are not as good as Ronnie Stanley. And I think, to me, even though the Ravens didn't make a move on day one, didn't sign anybody, that's a win in my book, 100%.
Yeah, of course. I mean, those teams that you mentioned, they were not very good, and they had huge salary space under the cap. So they had opportunities to appease their organization, whether it be the owner. Plus, you're also looking at your fan base. Then you're also looking at what those coaches are saying. Hey, man, we need offensive linemen. We need to fill in these gaps. We need to fill in these spaces. And so go out there and spend it. And that's what the salary cap is all about. I mean, obviously it raised up again. So you're not like we keep looking at it like these numbers, like, oh my God, look how much oh my God. Yes. But when you look at it relative to the salary cap and how it's continually gone up, it's kind of par for the course. Now, with that said, back to the Ravens and Ronnie Stanley, I think it was a situation where Ronnie is like, yo, man, we don't know his luxuries or his overall financial mindset. It could be a great one, and it could be one where he's just like sitting back, living off the hog once, he's done playing football. So with the Ravens' constraints, they made him an offer he couldn't refuse. He knows he's playing with Lamar. He knows he's going to have an opportunity to win. He knows them. They know him. There's opportunity for him to take care of himself in terms of his body physically. And, maybe he feels he can get another contract. We don't know, but we do know that, yes, to your point, EDC and them, they got off pretty good. And, yeah, it's a win-win for both sides.
I agree. And I think for the Ravens, who knew that they did want Ronnie back, Ronnie clearly wanted to be in Baltimore. I'm sure that he got wind of what this market was going to look like offensive line-wise, especially when you look back even to last year, Q, when guys like Robert Hunt got $100 million over 5 years, and there were a bunch of other $60, $70 million contracts. And for Ronnie, who did bet on himself and chopped that last year off of his deal, had a really good season. He helped the Ravens out there, especially with their cap situation. I'm really glad he was able to come back because, what was plan B there? Was it getting a rookie in the draft and trying to figure out if Rodgers playing the left or the right side? Were they going to overpay for a guy in free agency? I mean, that was a possible outcome for them. But again, you look at some of these deals that teams are giving out on day one here, and you're thinking, this guy's barely played, or this guy, he's fallen off, and you're seeing him get 30, 45, $50 million contracts total. And for Baltimore and some of these other organizations, Baltimore's not the only team to take this approach, but I think obviously with us, keeping up with the Ravens as much as we do, which just is second nature to us of the Ravens. And I said it on yesterday's show, they don't dive head first into day one of free agency. And again, I would love if the Ravens made splashes here and there, made a big trade. And there's still possibilities that they can. There's still players available out there, maybe Jair Alexander, one of these corners. Obviously, we'll talk about Brandon Stevens leaving coming up. But even when you talk about another reason why they're winners, Q, depending on how you felt about guys like Patrick Mekari and Brandon Stevens, whether you wanted them back or not, well, the Ravens do lose 4. We actually had something break right as we're recording this, so we'll get to that in the second part of the show. But we have 4 guys who have now left the Ravens. 2 of them for multi-year big deals, $30+ million. Nobody really expected Mekari or Stevens to come back, but the Ravens in line for comp picks for both those guys. And again, if you didn't want either of those players back, well, I think you're thinking, okay, hey, I'm a winner in this situation because guys that you don't want back on the team aren't there anymore. And again, nobody really expected those 2 to really come back anyway.
Yeah, and that's where you look at the big picture. You know your roster. They know their roster really good. And there was a report, I believe it was last offseason or right before the season, where the report talked about how much other teams take the Ravens guys that weren't re-signed or free agents or draft picks that didn't make the Ravens squad and put them on their squad. And it was more than any other team. And it's the due process that the Ravens put themselves through to make sure that they have that evaluation for that guy, and it's a good one. And I think other teams are like, well, we're going with this scouting report, but look what the Ravens did. Look, oh my God, we need to get him. So it's that situation where, yeah, Mekari, Brandon Stevens, guys like that, where we're going to go ahead and we're taking them. Why? Because they were the Ravens and they had a great evaluation. Why? Because we didn't do as good of an evaluation as the Ravens did, and we saw the way they played, and they know what winning culture is about, so we're going to put them on our team. Oh, okay. Maybe we should upgrade we don't want to talk about all the upgrades. We just want to do what we do, which is pilfer the Ravens when their free agents become opportunistic and want to go and leave somewhere else. We'll dangle the money at them.
Yeah, there's so much that I think for Baltimore, they have so many opportunities every year to bring in guys throughout the entire free agency process. And that can just be, a matter of them saying, oh, well, this guy's market is pretty strong on day one. He's asking for a lot of money. Well, how about we just wait it out a little bit, couple weeks, maybe a month, say, hey, you want a number, go out there and try to find it. If you don't find it, come back to us and we can talk about maybe a lesser number. And they've done that with many different free agents. And for some guys here, there's a specific type of player the Ravens should be interested in here. I don't think that they should be so inclined to get like the project free agent guys. You need guys that can help you win now. I think you save the projects for the draft. You have 11 draft picks and that'll be what you're able to do. But again, Mekari and Stevens both had their struggles last season, and they weren't like horrendous players. Like, they didn't have no positive impact, but Brandon Stevens was picked on quite a bit, and Patrick Mekari, a lot of penalties. So you look at those two very big negatives, and you now hope that the Ravens can upgrade at both of those positions. And hey, they'll maybe get a comp pick in the process of all that happening as well. So the Ravens approach, I know it's not flashy, it's not exciting early on, but this is what we've come to expect with the Ravens. And again, I tried to prep everybody as best I could on the show yesterday saying, hey, look, it's probably not going to happen this way. And again, now that it has happened, it's still, it evokes some emotion. And I understand that. I'm in that, and I also want them to make splash moves, but we have to just really take a step back and say, yeah, the Ravens right now, not a lot of cap space, so they're figuring it out as they go too. Coming up, though, we do know who the Ravens lost. We talked about a couple of them in this first part of the show. We'll go more in depth, though, coming up next on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is sponsored by Betterhelp. Taking care of your mental health can feel like a big investment, but it's just as important as taking care of your body. Traditional in-person therapy can cost anywhere from $100 to $250 per session, but with Betterhelp, you can save up to 50% per session. Betterhelp offers a flat fee for weekly online therapy sessions, making professional support more accessible and affordable. With over 30,000 therapists and over 5 million people helped, it's the world's largest online therapy platform. And therapy has so much impact, and it can help you with learning positive coping skills, how to set boundaries, and so much more. Plus, therapy can fit busy lives too. BetterHelp makes it easy to fit therapy into your schedule, whether you're working, parenting, or always on the go. Your well-being is worth it. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off the first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Back on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher and Qadry Ismail still talking with you here. Ravens, in my opinion, win day one of free agency, not because they made any moves, but because maybe of the moves they did not make / not overpaying guys either. That obviously it's a good thing when you don't overpay guys. But the Ravens did lose some contributors from last year's team, 4 of them at the time of this recording to be exact. We'll talk about a breaking one that happened just a couple of minutes ago after we talk about the 3 that happened first. So let's just do it in order here. We talked about Patrick Mekari signs with the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars, people talk about the Jets and the Giants for taking Ravens players. The Jaguars were pretty popular with, taking some of these players away from Baltimore also, where you have a guy in Patrick Mekari, 3 years, $37.5 million. It can go up to 39, well over $20 million guaranteed. I think in this situation, there is a lot to like about Mekari with his versatility on the offensive line, him stepping up over the years for Baltimore since coming in as an undrafted free agent since 2019. But clearly there were issues with penalties, issues with sometimes getting beat by stronger or even quicker players off the line. The Ravens could certainly upgrade at that guard position. If he had come back on a 3-year, $20 million deal, I think a lot of people would like that as a backup. But the reality is, with the offensive line market being so inflated right now, really felt like there was no shot he was going to come back.
I think it's interesting because versatility across the offensive line, depth across the offensive line is such a commodity and a valuable one. And when you look at what the Jaguars did as far as just dumping a lot of the players that they had to kind of clear cap space away and give themselves a restart. Obviously, they fired their head coach. Now they bring in a whole new regime. It's no surprise that they would go with a guy like a Pat Mekari. On the flip side of things, that means that the Ravens must really, really feel that they have an opportunity to upgrade their offensive line via the draft and who they might have from a young guy perspective, because that versatility doesn't grow on trees. You need that swing tackle, swing guard. You need that all-purpose guy because, unfortunately, injuries do happen. And I think for the Ravens, they must be feeling really good and really confident that either through the draft or through what they've seen from a maybe not this first tier of free agency, but maybe that second or even third tier of free agency, they've put themselves in a position where they've evolved the roster all the way up and through the actual art of the 53-man first opening day, like, let's go, going way back to Brian McKinney when you talk about like these offensive line moves. So yes, they're going to miss Mekari for sure, but I don't think it's one of those scenarios where the Ravens are like, oh my gosh, what did we do? I think that they're putting themselves in a position where they're going to jockey for a position and they will replace him.
Yeah, so Andrew Voorhees right now obviously is that guy that you immediately slot in there, but they could add a guard in the draft. They could figure something out with a vet potentially too. But it just felt like the writing was on the wall once they re-signed Ronnie Stanley to that deal where it's like, okay, are they going to be able to spend 2 big money contracts, give those out to 2 offensive linemen? It didn't really feel likely, and now we know Mekari is gone. So a lot of great contributions. Again, super sub offensive linemen. Would have liked them back in that role, but as a starter, there's certainly room for the Ravens to upgrade. Now, Q, the next one we're going to be talking about here, Brandon Stephens. I know for a lot of Ravens fans, the reaction to this was, oh, he's gone. He's gone. And obviously that stems from the penalties, him not turning his head around for the ball, and quite honestly, the fall off he had after 2023 was amazing in 2023, fell off really hard in 2024. This is a 3-year deal for Brandon Stephens again, and $36 million for Brandon Stephens. It's interesting because, there were rumors and rumblings that Stephens in his market were going to be maybe a little more lucrative than a lot of people anticipated. But again, if he were to come back on a cheap deal to be a 4th corner, I would have been okay with that because then you still upgrade the position and you still have the upside. But $36 million, the Ravens were never going to give him in any world. They want to upgrade there, it certainly feels like. And the Brandon Stephens era comes to a close. It was an interesting one, to say the least, especially with the fall off in 2024. But kind of what's your outlook on the Ravens corner position now that we know Stephens is officially gone?
Yeah, I mean, the whole corner market, it's you look at the Jets' new head coach and what he is or was, a former DB himself, Aaron Glenn. And then when Aaron became the defensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions, I mean, they had an amazing defense. Really, guys played hard for him. You listen to some of his interviews that he did, you were seeing how passionate he was. And, it's just like, wow, he was a more seasoned ZO, if you will. And I think ZO will kind of ascend into that realm of what we're seeing with Aaron Glenn. Pause. DJ Reed, for whatever reason, I thought he was a good defensive back, and yet he leaves to go to the place that Aaron Glenn left, Detroit. So there was a clear void there in the New York Jets, and obviously they have their, again, cap space. They're going to go ahead. There was the negotiations, and I think one thing that we we underlook. It's called fit. Can that guy fit? And can, from a coaching perspective, I don't know connecting the dots as far as Brandon Stevens and their defensive back coach, but I do know that they probably are looking at it, examining the film, and saying to themselves, you know what? I think that we can bring him in, and these are some technique things that their coaches, those defensive backs, that defensive coordinator, they didn't put him in the right position. We can put him in the right position and succeed. And that happens across the board as far as all of the different position groups. And I think sometimes you also get coaches that get exposed too. Like, you're just not that good of a coach, and you ruined this guy. Now this guy flourishes at another spot because they do see his value and put him in right positions, and he gains back that confidence for himself, a la Tua Tagovailoa, when it came to, his reformation of quarterbacking play and why he was what he was, because one coach goes out, another coach comes in. They have a system that favors him better, and the language and the way in which he is spoken to gains this unworldly confidence. Now, that being said, we roll the dice, and you're going to see whether or not Brandon Stevens is going to be able to change some of those habits that kind of made him a liability in space. We'll see.
And I think, again, for the Ravens, them not paying out those two contracts for the players that those two are right now is a win in my book. And I think that they can upgrade there. But you're right, where if the fit is better for Stevens in New York and they can get the best out of him, bring him back more to what 2023 was. It's not that the potential isn't there, especially because Brandon Stevens hasn't been playing corner all that long anyway. So it's not like he's a seasoned 30-year-old vet in his prime right now. There's still potential there, but I just think for what the Ravens are trying to accomplish, it wasn't the right timeline, and I think that they want to go with a more experienced outside corner. So whether that is through trade, maybe for agency, we'll kind of see how that whole situation unfolds. But then you have a couple of the smaller signings that the Ravens had guys taken away from them. So we'll start off with Malik Harrison. Familiar kind of pathway for a now former inside linebacker of the Ravens. Harrison signs a 2-year, $10 million deal with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He reunites with Patrick Queen in Pittsburgh. Apparently Pittsburgh just loves Baltimore Ravens linebackers. I mean, that's the story there. Harrison was someone who definitely had his moments of struggle as well. I'll give him a lot of credit for stepping up for Roquan when Roquan was injured during that Los Angeles Chargers game. He had the game of his life in that game. He's been a very sound special teams contributor for Baltimore. He's played some outside linebacker too. Versatile piece. And again, $5 million, probably a bit too rich for the Ravens' liking there, but the Ravens knew they were probably going to lose at least one of their free agent inside linebackers, and Malik Harrison just going to a different side of the rivalry here.
You know, it's interesting. You say the Chargers game was, that, game where he just played and played well. And but I also look at when he played the Steelers game when it was kind of like, all right, this is it. We need somebody to make some stops. And both he and Roquan seemed to gel. And it wasn't like some kind of, all right, I got to hold your hand. Like, he was in there, and, they tried to catch him in space. I think that's something that, the Steelers are going to have to recognize that, sometimes he's not the greatest space player. Look at the game against, the Bengals where, they kind of put him out there in space, and he's like, oh my God. Or heck, you look at the Kansas City Chiefs game, it was like, oh my God, But I think the bigger picture is that Malik Harrison, he's a good, strong role player and knows defense, is a professional, is going to make some plays for that Pittsburgh-style defense.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's interesting because Pittsburgh also obviously acquired DK Metcalf. They signed Darius Slay. So we'll see what their quarterback looks like. I mean, whether it's Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, that's the big one. They can't go anywhere without a quarterback. So we'll see what that is. But again, I think they've made some decently solid moves overall.
Justin Fields, he took his business elsewhere too, and now he's in New York.
Yeah, hey, Brandon Stevens' new teammate, Justin Fields, is both those guys going to the Jets. So speaking of New York, and again, we haven't talked about this. This happened while we were recording. Do you want to guess which Ravens player signed elsewhere? It's with the Giants. It's not a big name. Do you have any guess whatsoever?
Well, okay, fine. I have this platform called X,
Oh,
and
so
yeah,
you know.
yes, Chris Board.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'll just pull it up. Chris Board to the Giants. Q ruins all the fun. Chris Board signed with the Giants. 2-year deal worth up to $6 million. Another inside linebacker for Baltimore, depth inside linebacker, now off the team. Chris Board actually had a pretty solid year when he was given opportunities, in my opinion, Q, because they were looking for guys. And you talk about Malik Harrison, Trenton Simpson didn't really work out the way they wanted him to, and they were scrambling for answers. I thought Harrison and Chris Board both gave them solid play at times. And obviously we know Chris Board is renowned for his special teams ability. That was obvious during his first stint with the Ravens before coming back this second time around. I don't know what his role is going to be in New York, but what's apparent, Q, is now the Ravens do need a couple of depth inside linebackers on their roster.
Is it me or was it the Chris Board show when they were playing against Houston? I think
yes. He had a couple of those games.
Right. I don't know why that particular Houston game really stuck out to me as like, wow, go ahead, Chris Board. Okay. But yeah, like you're right. He did. He had those games where, it became Board and Harrison. Like, you didn't even have Trenton, even in the conversation. It was just Board and Harrison. Like they were doing what they needed to do, and I was thoroughly impressed. I think that's one thing. You look at bigger picture wise when you look at how you need to seize the moment and opportunity. First, you better know the defense, and then once you know the defense, you best go ahead and show up and do your job. You don't got to be flashy. You get, obviously, you get $100 million is because you're go ahead and be Roquan Smith in Chicago that gives up a second round pick to Chicago to become a Raven. And then, of course, the high tide raises all ship mantra. At the same time, when you're not that and you're developing in the whole 9 yards, you do your special teams. But you best know when it's your number call to actually play either offensive side of the ball, defensive side of the ball, you best step up. And he did. And I think for Chris Board, good for him that, it's good, strong money, not, groundbreaking money, but it's good, strong money. And I think that's a good thing for Chris Board.
Yeah, look, none of these guys are massive losses. I think they'll miss each guy in different ways, individual ways. But when it comes to these make or break, oh, wow, the Ravens have a massive hole on their roster. These are guys that either were expected to leave or there are multiple different pathways to replace them. So coming up in the final part of the show, we'll finish out our conversation about the Ravens free agent losses on day one, but then also talk about an updated list of free agent targets for day two and beyond. Stay tuned. Plenty coming your way on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is a master TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return. While you get real-time updates on their progress, you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Back on Locked On Ravens, Qadry Ismail, Kevin Oestreicher. We're talking Ravens football with you as we do here each and every day on Locked On Ravens every single weekday, 5 days per week for this show. And of course, we'll be hustling and bustling throughout all the free agency period. Whenever the Ravens sign somebody, we'll be going live here talking Ravens football. But Q, we mentioned those 4 guys the Ravens lost yesterday. They still have other opportunities. Again, I'm not sure when that first signing will come down the pipeline for them, but you look at some of the guys that are still available. Von Miller is a part-time guy, could maybe work. Azeez Ojulari is someone at the edge rusher position who he had a good year before having to miss the final 6 weeks last season. You have a couple of former Ravens and Matt Judon and Zadarius Smith that could maybe be options to come back, although I'm not sure if that bridge is burned with Zadarius after what happened last time. Mentioned corners, Mike Hilton, who's a really good slot guy, Asante Samuel Jr., Rasul Douglas. There are some of those guys as well. There are actually a decent amount of like depth corners. I'm not sure how many of those would be worth it for Baltimore to actually invest in. If you're looking more at the defensive end market, a lot of those guys are already off the board, but Emmanuel Ogbah, DeMarcus Lawrence, there are some of those guys as well. Wide receiver is a big position here. Everybody's talking about players like Devontae Adams already off the board, Marquise Brown off the board. But then you still have guys like Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp is going to get cut. Or it might already be cut at the time of this recording, but he's not going to be a member of the Rams next season. Maybe old friend DeMarcus Robinson comes back. So still a lot of opportunity for the Ravens to sign guys or even trade for guys as well. Guys will come off the board one by one, but I feel like Baltimore might sign one or two guys in this first week of free agency and then kind of see how the rest of the market plays out.
Yeah, and I think that's what it is. It's like, all right, cool. We know what we have. We know that, there's a pecking order. We know that, there's going to be competition. That there's the season, and then there's the off season that becomes a season for the front office. The coaches do what they do as far as, preparing the team, getting it ready, go through the season. My favorite part of the year. Then there's the off season where Kevin Oestreicher takes over, and I sit back and I just say, yeah, good point. Because there's so much speculation. Holy mother of pearl. Like, we just don't know, like, how it's shaping out. We do now know Mekari's not going to be here. We do now know that the Harrison-Board combo that was last year is no longer here. So what does Trenton Simpson look like? Are they going to see somebody who's on a roster? Who are they drafting? What other free agents that got released are going to be able to kind of be in there? What rush-ins that we are looking at? Yeah, the Zadarius Smiths of the world. Zadarius, okay, he had a really strong year, but you're right. There's the personality of it all and whether or not he fits or not fits and all those, question marks. And that's where, again, this is Kevin Oestreicher's world because it's the off season. When it's the season and I can just start to see that 90-man roster shape, then all of a sudden they whittle it down to the opening day, and now I'm like, yeah. See, that's my wheelhouse. Right now, we're like, we just don't know. And I'm okay with not knowing. But if you're a Ravens fan, I think that it's not just a blind trust of like, oh, yeah, the Ravens, yeah. No, but I do think that you got to look at them historically and just recognize the pattern. And I think that's the big thing. It's the pattern in which they do things. They never really are big, like, oh my God, here's what we're going to do type of guys. They're very surgical and strategic about it.
Yeah, 100%. And again, with them re-signing Ryan to the deal they got him at, you see all these offensive linemen getting overpaid. That to me is a win for the Ravens. I mean, just not overpaying guys. Then you have others who, again, Brandon Stevens not being back on the roster. Maybe you think that's a win. Passion Mekari, maybe you think that's a win. All these guys, right? They have opportunities now to improve their roster. You're right, Q. Speculation is the key word of the offseason. You don't know what happens until it happens. But with Baltimore, we can almost pick up on trends. And their trend is they don't dive headfirst into the day one of free agency. They like to let marks develop. And that, again, seems to be the smart move because as time goes on, those prices go down. And while you might not have as many options to pick from, these guys are professionals, and there's still going to probably be a lot of guys available for Baltimore to choose from in the coming days, weeks, even months, as we've seen the Ravens make those moves in June and July and then pay off down the stretch for the team. But Q, I appreciate you. Thank you for hopping on as always, and tell people where they can find you, what you're working on as the speculation season continues.
Well, we ain't speculating here. We're saying this plainly as plainly can be, that it's missiletraining.com where you can go and find me. I ain't hard to find. You trying to go ahead and have better human movement and sports performance, I'm your guy. Missiletraining.com. We make sure that you're durable first. Your movement matters. Once we get through that, then you can talk about speed and agility and strength and all the other components that make you a better you. Whether you're an athlete, whether you're a team doing team training, doesn't matter the sport. We're not one myopic group. Oh, we're just football. No, we're all of them. At the same time, when it comes to WJZ, that's where you can see me on TV and say, cheese, because we're talking Ravens football throughout the year. Of course, Purple Playbook, of course, Purple Pregame is where you'll see me before each and every Ravens game. And then every single week, 52 weeks out of the year, once a week, you're going to see me, Kevin Oestreicher, and I on Locked On Ravens right here, chilling out, doing our thing, talking shop. This is Kevin's time of the year, so I just allow him just to educate me and you. But when it comes to that season, oh yeah, we sit back and we just talk shop and we love it. Let's go.
Football is all around, year-round sport. You got the season, you got the off-season. The NFL never sleeps. And, of course, yes, be sure to follow Q everywhere. Be sure to check out missiletraining.com. Incredible work Q does over there. So links in the description down below. Q, I appreciate you as always. And thank you to everybody who watched, listened today to Locked On Ravens. On the way out, hit the like and subscribe button in video form and follow along in audio form for 5 days a week of daily Ravens coverage. Coming up tomorrow, we'll be back talking about the latest happenings in free agency, and who knows, maybe by then the Ravens will have signed someone and we go live for that signing too. So be sure to stay tuned. I'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.